The doctor's face was a blurry shape above me, haloed by the harsh fluorescent light of the ICU. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. A tube snaked down my throat, breathing for me, while a symphony of machines beeped a steady rhythm that was supposed to be the sound of my life. But I was a prisoner inside my own body, conscious of everything, yet unable to signal it to the outside world. He leaned closer, his voice a low, confidential whisper that felt more like a conspiracy than a comfort. "Mr. Ryan Evans," he said, his breath smelling faintly of coffee and regret. "I don't know if you can hear me, but your family has asked us to stop treatment." He paused, letting the words hang in the sterile air. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor next to me suddenly sounded like a countdown timer. My own family, my mother, my father, my brother. They had signed the papers. They had decided it was time for me to die. He continued, "They believe it's what's best. To let you go peacefully." But I knew it wasn't about peace. It was about the 7-figure life insurance policy I had foolishly listed my parents as beneficiaries on years ago. They thought I was a vegetable, a shell whose organs were worth more than his consciousness. They didn't realize that behind these still eyelids, I was screaming. I heard every word, every hushed discussion in the hallway, every crocodile tear my mother shed for the nurses. They were grieving a son who wasn't dead, all while planning how to spend his money. You might be wondering how a family could sign their own son's death warrant. The answer begins with a simple, cruel fact of my existence. I was born to be the spare part, the shadow that made my golden child brother shine all the brighter. My brother Alex was born 2 years after me, but in my family's eyes, he was the main event. I was just the warm-up act. From our earliest days, the universe of our home was tilted on an axis, and that axis was Alex. He was the golden child, the one destined for greatness, while I was the scapegoat, the one responsible for anything that went wrong. When Alex got a C on a math test, my parents threw a pizza party to celebrate his improvement. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, my father would barely look up from his newspaper, mumbling, "Don't let it go to your head." My existence was defined by what I had to give up for him. My toys were his toys. If I saved up my allowance for a new video game, my mother would say, "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Alex has been wanting that one. Why don't you let him have it? It will make him so happy." My happiness was never part of the equation. I was taught, through 1,000 tiny cuts, that my purpose was to serve as a stepping stone for my brother. If a lamp broke, I was blamed for leaving it where Alex could knock it over. If Alex failed a class, it was my fault for not tutoring him enough, even when he refused to study. I was the family's built-in shock absorber, designed to take the blows so that Alex could coast through life without a scratch. This dynamic was the background radiation of my entire childhood. I learned to make myself small, to not want things too loudly, to not achieve things too publicly. My successes were seen as an affront to Alex's fragile ego. My failures were simply confirmation of my lesser status. So as I lay in that hospital bed, paralyzed and silent, the doctor's words were not just a shock, they were a clarification. It was the ultimate act of scapegoating. My life had been deemed less valuable than the financial windfall my death would provide. They weren't just pulling the plug on a machine, they were cashing in their least valuable asset. The moment I turned 18, I ran. I didn't just walk away from home, I fled to a university on the other side of the country. For a few years, there was a blissful silence. I put myself through school with scholarships and part-time jobs, relishing the anonymity and the freedom. For the first time, my accomplishments were my own, and my failures didn't have to be explained or justified to anyone. I thought I'd escaped. But a leash as strong as the one my family held on me doesn't break just because of distance. It only stretches. The call started after I landed my first real job as a software engineer. It was my mother, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm so proud of you, honey," she'd begin, a phrase I'd never heard in my life. Then came the real reason for the call. "Your brother Alex, he's got so much potential, but he's hit a rough patch." That rough patch became his permanent address. First, it was a few $100s to help Alex make rent. Then it was a few thousand to bail him out of a credit card debt. He drifted from one brilliant get-rich-quick scheme to another, a dropshipping business, a crypto venture, an app that was supposed to be the next Uber. Each one failed, and each time I was the emergency fund. My parents were the willing middlemen in this exploitation. "He just needs a little push," my father would say. "You're stable. You can afford to help your brother get on his feet." Meanwhile, I was living in a small apartment, driving a 10-year-old car, and diligently putting money into my savings and retirement accounts. My quiet, disciplined success wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource to be tapped. I paid for Alex's down payment on a car he later crashed. I paid for his business trip to Miami that was just a vacation. I kept giving, clinging to a stupid, childish hope that one day one of these payments would finally clear my debt of being the second best son. I was buying a love that was never for sale. The final bill came on a Tuesday morning, a demand so large it made my stomach drop. It was the one that would ultimately lead me to that hospital bed. It was my mother on the phone, her voice brimming with a manufactured excitement that always set my teeth on edge. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime," she chirped. Alex had found a business to buy, a struggling local sports bar called The Final Whistle. The owner was retiring and willing to sell cheap. Alex, who had never managed anything more complicated than a fantasy football league, was convinced he could turn it into a gold mine. All he needed was $150,000 for the down payment and initial operating costs. The number hung in the air between us. It wasn't just a lot of money, it was everything I had. My emergency fund, my down payment for a future home, the fruits of a decade of relentless work and sacrifice. For the first time in my life, I said no. "I can't, Mum. That's my entire life savings." The silence on the other end of the line was cold and immediate. The fake excitement vanished, replaced by a familiar, icy disappointment. "I see," she said. Then my father took the phone. His voice wasn't pleading, it was commanding. "Don't be selfish," he started. "Your brother is family. This is his one real shot. Are you going to stand in his way? Are you going to tell him he can't have a future because you want to hoard your money?" They didn't shout. They didn't have to. They just expertly pressed on the bruises they had spent a lifetime creating, the guilt, the shame. The fear of being cast out completely. I fought for an hour, but it was like arguing with a tidal wave. They told me this was what family did. They told me I owed them. They told me I owed Alex. In the end, exhausted and broken down, I did what I was trained to do. I surrendered. I logged into my bank account, my hand trembling as I stared at the six-figure number I had been so proud of. With a single click, it was gone, transferred to my parents' account to fund Alex's latest fantasy. I felt hollowed out. To make back even a fraction of the loss, I took on extra freelance work, coding late into the night after my day job. 3 weeks later, I was driving home at 2 a.m., my eyelids feeling like lead weights. I just needed to get to my empty apartment. I remember the road curving, the blinding glare of headlights drifting into my lane. I remember the sickening crunch of metal. Then only darkness. The next few days in that bed were a special kind of hell. I was a ghost at my own funeral, forced to listen to my mother's performative sobs and my father's solemn discussions with doctors about my wishes, which were, of course, their wishes. They'd hold my hand, the skin of which I couldn't feel, and tell me they loved me and that it was time to rest. All the while, I was mentally cataloguing every lie, every fake tear. The grief in my heart had burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the desire for justice. Or maybe it was just revenge. My only break from their suffocating presence was a night nurse named Sarah. Unlike the others who saw me as a collection of vital signs, she saw a person. She would change the channel on the TV for me, telling me the plot of the old movies she put on. She'd rearrange my pillows and talk to me, not in the pitying tone my family used, but as an equal. "That brother of yours gives me the creeps," she muttered one night, thinking I couldn't hear. "Walks in here like he already owns the place." It was the first time someone had validated the truth of my life, and it gave me hope. One night, while she was checking my vitals, I focused every ounce of my will, every memory of betrayal, every spark of rage into my right index finger. I commanded it to move. A faint tremor, a barely perceptible twitch was all I could manage. But Sarah, whose hand was resting on mine, felt it. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the door, then back at me, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning realization. She leaned in close, her voice a whisper. "Did you just do that? If you can hear me, do it again." I summoned all my strength and twitched it again. A tear welled in her eye, but this one was real. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, we have to be smart. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Understand?" I blinked once. Slowly, painstakingly, she asked the questions. "Is your family behind this? Yes. Do you want to die? No. Are you in danger from them?" A long, deliberate single blink, yes. A grim understanding settled on her face. She was my only ally. I had to trust her. Over the next hour, I used the same method to spell out 2 words for her, a monumental effort of will. Lawyer. Then a name, David Chen. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. Every time the door to my room opened, I felt a jolt of either hope or dread. I watched my family come and go, my brother Alex smugly talking on his phone about renovations for his new bar, the one he'd bought with my life savings. They were so sure of their victory, they had no idea the game had changed. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, a man in a perfectly tailored suit walked into my room. It was David Chen. My family, who were in the middle of a hushed conversation with a hospital administrator, fell silent. David wasn't just my lawyer, he was a friend. I had done some pro bono coding work for his small firm when he was just starting out, and he'd insisted on drawing up my legal documents for free, including a durable power of attorney. "You never know," he'd said. "Always have someone in your corner who isn't family." I never understood how right he was until that moment. He walked past my stunned parents without a glance and addressed the administrator directly. "I am David Chen, Mr. Evans's legal counsel," he said, his voice calm and sharp. "I am here to assume all decision-making authority regarding his care, effective immediately." He slid a document across the table. "This is a legally executed power of attorney, naming me as his healthcare proxy. The family's authority is revoked." My father's face went from pale to purple. "What is this? This is insane. We are his parents." My mother, her act completely shattered, stood up. "Our son is in no condition to have a lawyer. We are in charge here." David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "On the contrary," he said, looking at them for the first time with cold disdain. "My client is perfectly lucid, a fact which Nurse Sarah here can attest to. He is the one who summoned me. Your visiting privileges are now restricted. Security will escort you out." The sight of my family being led away, sputtering with impotent rage, was the first real medicine I'd received. Later, David stood by my bed with Sarah. "Phase 1 is complete," he said quietly. "You're safe. Now, for Phase 2, protecting your assets. I've already put a temporary freeze on your main accounts. What do you want to do next?" While my family was reeling from their loss of control at the hospital, I was fighting my own war. Physical therapy was a grueling, inch-by-inch battle. Every day I worked with therapists, pushing my mind to reconnect with my unresponsive limbs. The fuel for this fight wasn't hope for a full recovery, it was pure, unadulterated rage. With every muscle I managed to twitch, I pictured my brother's smug face. With every painful stretch, I imagined my parents' shock when they realized the ATM had been shut down for good. My progress was slow, but it was steady. My voice was still gone, but I could now weakly move my right hand, allowing me to communicate with David by tapping out letters on a board. My first instruction was clear: the money. The $150,000 they had extorted from me to buy Alex's bar. "There's no loan agreement," David said, pacing my room. "It's your word against theirs. They'll just say it was a gift." "Then we make them admit it wasn't," I tapped out slowly. "Use their greed." And so we devised a plan. It was a Trojan horse built of legal paperwork and baited with their own arrogance. David drafted a formal letter to my parents and Alex. It didn't demand the money back. Instead, it celebrated Alex's brilliant business acumen. It stated that I, having had a near-death experience, realized the importance of family and wanted to formalize my support. The letter proposed that I invest another $100,000 into the bar. In exchange for this new investment, the agreement would formalize my position as a 51% majority shareholder, with the initial $150,000 officially documented as my buy-in capital. They would get more cash, but I would get control. We were betting that their greed would blind them to the obvious trap. We sent the offer. For a week, there was silence. I could picture the scene in their house. Alex puffing out his chest, my parents praising his ability to wrap me around his finger yet again. They would see it as their weak, pathetic son and brother trying to buy his way back into their good graces. They wouldn't read the fine print. They never did. Then a courier arrived at the hospital with a return envelope for David. He opened it, pulled out the contract, and scanned the last page. He looked at me, and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "They signed it," he said. "They took the bait. Congratulations. You are now the majority owner of the final whistle." My next instruction to David was simple and spelled out with a new, firmer tap of my finger on the letterboard: audit. The contract my family had so eagerly signed wasn't just a confirmation of my investment, it was a leash. As the 51% shareholder, I had the right to inspect every aspect of the business. And we both knew that my brother Alex's finances wouldn't stand up to even the slightest scrutiny. David hired a forensic accountant, a woman named Ms. Albright, who had a reputation for being able to find a single undeclared dollar in a mountain of paperwork. She was, in short, my family's worst nightmare. 2 days later, David and Ms. Albright walked into the final whistle. I was told later that Alex was at the bar, pouring free drinks for his friends and boasting about his new life as a business owner. He apparently greeted David with a smug grin, thinking he was there to discuss the next installment of cash. The grin faded when David introduced Ms. Albright. "An audit?" Alex scoffed. "I don't think so. This is my bar." David calmly slid a copy of the partnership agreement across the sticky bar top. "According to Section 7, subsection B of the contract you signed, Mr. Evans, your partner has the right to a full and transparent audit at any time. Ms. Albright will require access to all of your books, receipts, and point-of-sale data immediately." The colour drained from Alex's face. He started stammering, arguing that it was a misunderstanding. He made a frantic call to our parents, who in turn began bombarding David's office with furious, hysterical voicemails. But it was useless. They had walked into the cage themselves and signed the document that locked the door behind them. Trapped, Alex had no choice but to lead Ms. Albright to the tiny, messy back office where he kept his records, which consisted mostly of a shoebox overflowing with crumpled receipts. The final text I received from David that night was short and sweet. It read, "Audit is underway. He's been using the business account like his personal ATM. We've got him." Back in my hospital room, I allowed myself a small, weak smile. The first threads of their world were beginning to unravel. Ms. Albright's final report was more damning than I could have ever imagined. David read excerpts to me in my hospital room, his voice a flat monotone that only amplified the absurdity of the findings. Alex had been treating the bar's bank account as his own personal slush fund. There were charges for designer clothes listed as new staff uniforms, a weekend trip to a luxury resort categorized as attending a hospitality conference, and thousands of dollars in cash withdrawals simply labeled petty cash. All told, he had embezzled over $50,000 in just 3 months, all while the business itself was bleeding money due to his incompetence. Crucially, Ms. Albright also found evidence that he was preparing to apply for a large business loan, using my initial investment as proof of the bar's financial health. He was getting ready to dig a much deeper hole. Armed with this mountain of evidence, David summoned my parents and Alex to his office. They arrived, I'm told, still clinging to a shred of arrogance, believing they could somehow smooth talk their way out of it. They were ushered into a sterile conference room where David sat alone at a large table, the thick audit report placed squarely in the center. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out the facts of the embezzlement, showing them copies of fake invoices and personal credit card statements paid by the business. He explained that these actions constituted multiple felonies, including fraud and tax evasion. Then he delivered the ultimatum. "You have 2 options," he stated coldly. Option A, Alex signs over his entire 49% stake in the business to my client. In return, my client will absorb the losses and will not forward this report to the district attorney. Alex walks away with nothing but the clothes on his back. Option B, you refuse and I make a phone call that will likely result in your son facing several years in prison. The silence was deafening. My mother began to weep, not the fake tears I knew so well, but real tears of panic. "You can't do this," she pleaded. "He's your brother." David leaned forward. "The brother you were willing to let die. This offer is infinitely more merciful than the one you gave him. You have 5 minutes." Trapped, defeated, and staring at the reality of their golden child in a prison jumpsuit, they folded completely. With a hand that shook with rage and humiliation, Alex signed the transfer document. The bar was now 100% mine. That evening, as my speech therapist helped me practice, I managed my first spoken word since the accident. It was raspy, weak, but clear. Good. With Alex neutralized and the bar secured, a new energy coursed through me. My recovery accelerated. The slow, agonizing work of physical therapy began to pay off. Soon I was able to sit in a wheelchair, and my voice, though still raspy, grew stronger every day. I was no longer a silent observer blinking out messages. I could speak. I could give orders. David would sit in my hospital room, now upgraded to a private rehabilitation suite, and we would plan my next move. The bar was just the opening salvo. It was a punishment tailored for Alex. Now it was my parents' turn. "What's their most valuable asset?" David asked one afternoon. I didn't have to think. "The house," I rasped. "The sprawling suburban home I grew up in. It was their pride and joy, the symbol of their perfect, successful family. It was also the stage for every humiliation I had ever endured. It was the place where I was made to feel small, worthless, and secondary. Taking it from them wouldn't just be financial, it would be poetic." "How?" I asked David. "They have no debt." David smiled faintly. "Oh, I think they do. They have a massive debt owed to you." For the next week, David and a paralegal spent hours with me, combing through a decade of my digital life. We went through old emails, text messages, and bank statements, creating a meticulous ledger of every dollar my parents had ever guilted me into giving them for Alex. The $5,000 for his car repairs, the $10,000 to cover his gambling debts, the dozens of smaller payments for his rent, his bills, his vacations. Each transaction was accompanied by a manipulative text from my mother. "You're his only hope, honey," or a demanding email from my father. "It's your duty as a brother." We found no evidence of any of it ever being paid back. The grand total of these undocumented loans came to just over $300,000. Armed with this damning financial history, David filed a lawsuit against my parents. The charge was simple: failure to repay personal loans. The demand was for the full amount, plus interest. When they inevitably couldn't produce that much cash, the suit would seek its payment from their only major asset. A process server delivered the papers to their front door the following Tuesday. I imagined the look on my mother's face as she read the legal filing, not just a demand for money, but a multi-page attachment detailing every single time they had used me as their personal bank. They thought they had sacrificed their scapegoat son. They were about to find out he had kept all the receipts. The lawsuit landed like a bomb in the quiet, manicured world of my parents. The predictable explosion followed. David's office was inundated with their calls, alternating between my father's furious, sputtering threats and my mother's hysterical, weeping accusations. "He's throwing us out on the street, his own parents!" she shrieked at David's unflappable paralegal. "After everything we've done for him." The irony was so thick it was almost laughable. They hired a lawyer, a small-town attorney who was clearly overwhelmed from the moment he saw the case file David had prepared. During the discovery phase, our victory became a certainty. Their lawyer had nothing: no gift letters, no documents, no evidence of any kind to support their claim that the money was a gift. All they had was their blustering assertion that I was their son, and therefore my money was their money. In contrast, David presented them with a mountain of evidence. He had every bank transfer, every email, and every text message, organized chronologically into a devastating narrative of emotional blackmail and financial exploitation. Their lawyer, seeing the hopeless position he was in, advised them to settle. Their offer was pathetic. They proposed to pay me back $30,000, less than 10% of what they owed, paid out over 20 years. It was an insult disguised as a concession. I was in my new apartment, a place I'd secured using the liquidated assets from the now-sold bar, when David called me to relay the offer. I was finally out of the hospital, my body still weak, but my mind crystal clear. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Tell them I don't want a payment plan. Tell them I want the house." David relayed the counteroffer in cold, legal terms. Sign over the deed to the family home, and the debt would be forgiven. They would be given 30 days to vacate. Their lawyer had to explain the grim reality to them. They could refuse, go to court, and be publicly humiliated as a judge forced a sale of their home to satisfy the judgment against them. Or they could accept my offer. It was a choice between total public annihilation and a quiet, private surrender. They were trapped. Their golden child was broken, living on their couch, and their scapegoat son was about to become their landlord. As I hung up the phone, I pulled up a satellite image of the house on my laptop. The place I was never truly welcome. Soon it would be mine. The final confrontation was all that was left.